one way of a good adaptation, or the best way, is ensuring food security. It's nice to see, to hear that in this stage. But the food security, when you come to the food security, there are a lot of things that are coming in. Like if you go to the farmers, in order to ensure the food security, we need to invest much in agriculture for those who are dependent on agriculture. And at the same time also, we need to find some alternative in which the farmers will have power to purchase. Then they should not worry about the food, so that we can say that their food is secured. Then they can be adapted to the change in the climate. But for like our country, poor countries, where the economy of the people are much dependent on agriculture, farmers prefer to go to those new lands, which are forested lands, one way. Which means, in order to have a food security, we need to invest on the farmers so that they have the power also to, at least to adapt to the change in the climate. Some people also say that one way of securing food is increasing the forest cover so that the farmers can get an income from the forest, for which getting the income from the forest should be diversified, either from timber or other biological activities that we may be getting from that. But for the farmers to do that, there must be some incentive. I believe that there must be incentive. Like planting the degraded lands requires some incentives, because the farmer's livelihood may depend on that. My point is that, do you think that incentive is important for that? If it is important, how will we be doing an incentive to the farmers who want to plant trees, is one. Another thing that I just wanted to mention is that there are some points coming out in the last few days discussion at various Center that some have some recommendation to be financed for reforestation. That land should not be a land deforested, which is not more than 50 years, less than 50 years. So the minimum year that is considered as 50 years. Some say also 20 years. Do you think that that will help us to at least act to the change in the climate? Thank you.
No, I would very much agree with the speaker that we have to tackle not just the forest issues, but the whole issue of agricultural productivity and food security and livelihood development. I think it's not a secret to the world that the world sort of turned away from agriculture in the 1990s, and really de-emphasized that as a theme in the fight against poverty in the poorest countries. And that was a big mistake. And that was, I think, recognized, at least in the work that we did in the World Development Report in 2008, that a much stronger focus on improving agricultural productivity, livelihoods, diversification of the people that depend on agriculture for livelihood was going to be critical for poverty alleviation, but also to reduce the pressure on the environment as well. So we certainly turned towards that, and then we saw the food crisis that happened last year, which really turned the world's attention, including at leadership levels. But now the hard work has to happen, because it's really going to be a very difficult cross-cutting type of approach that has to be taken, restoring from sort of very much upstream R&D, which has been neglected internationally, and I chaired the Consultative Group International Agriculture Research. We have some of the centers here. Cifor is one of the centers. Really declining investment in R&D over the last 10, 15 years. That has to be restored. Restoring the R&D at the national level, regional level, and the extension services to be able to get new technologies to people. So that they can improve their productivity. Putting in place the infrastructure that's needed, whether that's the hard infrastructure, the roads to be able to get goods out, as well as logistics and the ICT to help farmers be able to improve their risks. So all those things that are things that the community has said we need to do. And I think that is going to be a very important part of our strategies going forward. As we do that, yes, I think that there is a movement, I would agree also, on trying to diversify sources of funds for farm families by having either investment in some forest stands or other parts of agricultural goods that might be able to provide income. So I think we see this as you have to work on the two things together. And finally, just one thing on the funding. We have not moved as much as we might have in providing new flows of funds to people. So we are experimenting, at least in the World Bank, with some donors on things like the Biocarbon Fund, which are trying to be able to monetize some of these benefits, again, to add an additional incentive to farmers to be able to, and those that are protecting the forests at the local level. Thank you.
So Bastian and then Martin.
Yeah, I would like to add 2 points to this. One is really when you talk about agriculture productivity, it's very important to design how you're going to improve agriculture productivity, because at the moment the agriculture sector is also one of the great greenhouse gas emitters. So if we're going to improve it just in a relatively conventional way, we also increase the emissions of greenhouse gases. Yeah, I'm thinking then of animal husbandry, for example. It is possible actually to reduce emissions from that by changing the food composition. You may want to talk about agriculture productivity in combination with compensatory actions like planting trees within the agriculture systems. Yeah. And then I want to add to that also an experience from Costa Rica, in the payment for environmental services schemes. This, I think, is a very good example of where it is recognized that forests are important, but not just for the farmers, but also for other actors, at the national level and international level. So there, what they're trying to do is share the benefits and the costs of maintaining those forests. Yeah. But also experience there has shown that it's not just a financial incentive that will maintain the forest. Yeah, many of the people that receive funding at the moment, they would have saved the forest anyway. Yeah. And one of the main factors which play a role there is, for example, education. Yeah, Costa Rica, since 1949, doesn't have an army, has instead invested that money in education and other social benefits. Yeah, and that has created really a large group of critical people which are aware of what the environment can mean to them, and they have really taken up the environment in their economic system through ecotourism, using national parks to attract tourists, to combine it with their beautiful beaches, etc. So it is much more than just trying to get finance to those people, and that's one of the main worries I have in RED. If you only think of trying to get money to people, that might not be enough. Yeah, it may be enough as long as there's money, but RED, well, maybe I'm a little bit pessimistic in that sense, but I think that may work for about 10 years. Yeah, and then the developing countries will have their technologies developed to actually reduce emissions. Yeah, so then are they going to still be interested in forests? So we have to really use the money that comes available through RED to set up systems, so that the forested countries can actually maintain locally incentives and that are not just financial incentives to maintain the forests.
I think that's a really important point as to how we match up with what's being discussed in the mitigation sub-plenary right now. Martin, did you have one brief comment?
Well, I did. It's such an area I work on, but it'll still be brief. I think it's important to look at food security at the local level because, as I said in my introduction, I think that's where a lot of the pressures will come on forests. And I have put outside a report. This is the full one. But there's only the flyer outside, but the cover looks like that at registration by the World Food Programme, which summarizes a set of 3 semi-independent modelling studies now, the last one by IFPRI just this year, which all tend to agree that we expect in the order of a 10 to 20% increase in the number at risk of hunger due to climate change. So on top of the billion, it's 100 to 200 million. That's the scale. These people are going to be on their move unless they starve on the spot, and they'll either be knocking on the doors of developing countries or on the forests and other, what other alternatives there are. And these 3 studies tend to agree. Of course, convergence of evidence can sometimes be wrong, so we don't want to be too comforted by it. More than 2/3 of this increase in climate change-driven risk of hunger is in Africa, mainly because of the increasing aridity issue projected for Africa, particularly in North Africa and Southern Africa. And the rest are in Central America and parts of the Middle East, where most of the drying is. But it's also, of course, dependent upon one's assumptions about continuing relatively low levels of technology, which is something we hope will not continue, which is why I say poverty alleviation is such an issue. But I was encouraged yesterday to hear some reporting in side events, yesterday and the day before, just how much certain simple adaptations in agriculture apparently can achieve in reducing the climate change yield impacts, even using current management and technology, efficient use of water, efficient use of fertilizers with current cultivars. So that I think it would make sense, but might go against oneself intuitively if you're a forest manager, to put some of one's money into building resilience in agriculture, as I said, to take the pressure as an indirect adaptation for the forest sector, to take pressure off forests in the event that the region one is in is a region that is heavily affected by increased risk of hunger from climate change.